The storm came first as sound, a low grinding roar that rolled down from the ridgeline of Wolf Creek proving ground and pressed itself into the frozen ground like something alive. Then came the hail, not gentle, not the kind that whispers against leaves. This was mountain hail, hard as gravel driven sideways by wind that had traveled 50 miles across open Montana range with nothing to slow it down. Wren Sutter had been crawling for 2 hours, maybe longer. Time had stopped meaning much since the wound in her side had gone from screaming to something quieter and far more dangerous. A dull ember that pulsed with every heartbeat. She had packed it herself an hour earlier, tearing strips from the undershirt beneath her field jacket, compressing them with a strip of paracord pulled from her vest, tying it off with fingers that no longer felt like her own. She was 28 years old. She had survived 2 combat tours, 18 months undercover inside a supply chain that funneled weapons through 3 continents, 3 attempts on her life in the last 72 hours alone. She was not going to die in the mud of an abandoned army proving ground that officially did not exist on any current map. The old firing range spread out below her in the gray afternoon light, a bowl-shaped valley ringed by lodgepole pine and granite outcrops, scarred with the rusted skeletons of target berms and collapsed observation towers. Wolf Creek had been decommissioned in the 90s. Officially. Unofficially, it still belonged to men who preferred that some places stay forgotten. Ahead through the sheeting hail she could make out what she needed. 2 collapsed concrete bunkers, half swallowed by scrub pine, their roofs caved in decades ago by weather and time. Between them, a shooting position with clean lines across the entire valley floor. Cover from 3 sides. Concealment from above, if she could reach it. She pulled herself forward another meter. Her left arm stayed tucked against her ribs, useless, cradling the wound. Her right arm did all the work, fingers digging into frozen mud that shifted and gave beneath her weight. The ghillie wrap she wore, stitched with dead grass and strips of burlap, had gone heavy with ice, adding what felt like 20 pounds to a body that had nothing left to give. In this terrain, in this weather, invisible was the only thing standing between her and dead. Behind her, scattered across the 2 miles of broken ground she had crawled through, lay everything that could have saved her and everything that could have gotten her killed. The radio, smashed against a rock. The satellite phone, crushed under her own boot heel because she knew exactly what frequency they would be listening on. Every device that could betray her position, she had destroyed with her own hands. Everything except the rifle. The rifle stayed. The rifle always stayed. A custom bolt-action chambered in .300 Norma Magnum, built over 10 years of saved pay and thousands of hours behind a scope, fitted to her exact body geometry, calibrated to ballistic data she had gathered through more rounds fired than she could count. A weapon built for one purpose: to reach out past 3,000 meters and touch someone who believed they were safe. She reached the bunkers and pulled herself into the depression where the 2 concrete slabs had fallen against each other, forming a low crawlspace half filled with old leaves and frozen water. The pain in her side flared white and sharp, then settled back into its slow burning rhythm. She allowed herself 30 seconds, only 30, enough to breathe, enough to remember why she was still moving. 3 teams. 3 reconnaissance teams, good operators, experienced men, all dead within the last 72 hours. 1 shot each. No shell casings recovered. No witnesses left standing. She had found the first team 2 days ago, or maybe it was 3. The details had started to blur at the edges, the way exhaustion does that to a mind running on nothing but adrenaline and old training. They had been doing the same work she was doing, following the same thread. Someone had gotten to them first. She lay still and listened. Wind through pine needles. Hail striking frozen ground in an uneven rhythm that made it hard to isolate any other sound. But the hunter was out there. Ren knew it the way prey always knows, in the base of the spine, in the place where instinct lives underneath conscious thought. Ghost, that was the name she had intercepted on a compromised frequency 2 nights earlier. A woman's voice, flattened by encryption, confirming a kill and requesting payment coordinates. European accent, a tone that treated murder as a line item on an invoice. Ren had spent 2 weeks tracing the pattern before she ever heard that voice, piecing together the methodology from 3 crime scenes that all told the same terrible story. Extreme range, total precision. A signature that belonged to someone who had been doing this work since before most active soldiers were born. 48 hours earlier, the world had looked completely different. Fort Cairo, Colorado, 0900 hours. Fluorescent lights and government-issue coffee in a briefing room with no windows. Ren had been delivering her final report to a handler whose name she did not know and whose face she would not remember. 18 months of work condensed into pages of encrypted files. She had called the operation Operation Palisade in her own head, though officially it did not have a name at all. A classified Cold War program had buried 12 caches of chemical agent across this stretch of Montana wilderness sometime between 1982 and 1987. VX nerve agent, sarin precursor, weapons that were supposed to have been destroyed after the program was shut down, except they had not been destroyed. Someone had been selling them instead. The trail had led Ren from small-time arms brokers into networks that were not supposed to exist. 11 months to connect the shipments back to Palisade. 7 more to identify the man at the center of it. Lieutenant General Roland Ashcombe, 4 stars, Defense Acquisition and Technology. A man who had been a young officer when Palisade began, who had spent 4 decades climbing rank while sitting on the knowledge of exactly where 12 buried weapons caches waited beneath American soil. $44 million. That was the conservative number of what Ashcombe had made selling weapons his own government had chosen to forget. Ren had proof, bank transfers, shell companies, shipping manifests, every detail documented, verified, and memorized, because she had learned early in this line of work that the only truly secure storage was the human mind. The handler had listened without expression, made 2 notes on a legal pad, then delivered the words that should have been routine. Package accepted. Extraction in 72 hours. Maintain cover until retrieval. Ren had walked out of that room, believing she had won. She had been catastrophically wrong. The warning came at 2200 hours the following night, a message that appeared on her secure laptop for exactly 10 seconds before erasing itself from every server it had touched. Operation compromised. Witnesses eliminated. Extraction canceled. Assume hostile contact imminent. 31 words that rewrote everything. Someone inside the chain of command had sold her out. Someone with access to personnel rosters and extraction protocols. Someone who knew exactly who was investigating Palisade and exactly how to make them disappear. The 3 recon teams had not been random. They had been part of the same investigation, pursuing different threads of the same conspiracy. Someone had identified every person who knew too much and hired a woman with a rifle to clean the board. Ren was the last name on that list. She had run. 28 minutes was all the warning gave her, the time it would take a tactical response team to reach a fixed location from the nearest staging point. She knew that number because she had trained on the other side of exactly that kind of operation. She had moved through her safe house with the efficiency of someone who had drilled for this exact moment 100 times in her head. Go bag. Hard drive destroyed. Phone scattered across 3 separate locations. The rifle, broken down into its components, wrapped in oilcloth, assembled again by touch in under 2 minutes. She had gone over the back fence as the tactical vehicles arrived out front. No sirens, No lights, just the low, coordinated sound of professionals who already knew their target was dangerous. Then came the mountains. Wolf Creek was less than 80 miles from where she had started running, a decommissioned proving ground swallowed by wilderness so total that entire vehicles had vanished into it without a trace. She had trained here once, years ago, during a pre-deployment workup designed to break the unprepared. If she survived long enough in this terrain, she might find someone she could trust. It was a terrible plan. It was the only plan she had. She found the first team on her second day in these mountains. They should not have been there at all. Wolf Creek was federal land, technically off-limits without special authorization. But she knew how these operations worked. Sometimes you went where the mission led you and sorted out the paperwork later, or you did not come back and there was no paperwork left to sort. The team had been hit during what looked like a planning session, gear still organized, camp still standing. The team leader had died instantly, one round through the chest before he could draw another breath. The others had died trying to find cover that did not exist. Wren had studied the scene with the flat detachment of a professional, tracing bullet trajectories back to their point of origin. 2,800 meters, an elevated position with a clean line into the entire kill zone. Whoever had taken that shot was operating at the outer edge of what should have been physically possible. The second team, 9 miles further north, had died the same way. The third had been caught trying to run. Wren stood over their bodies in the freezing rain and understood with total clarity exactly what she was facing. Ghost was not simply good. Ghost was the kind of shooter who appeared once in a generation, a lifetime of dedication paired with talent that most people could not even comprehend. And Ghost was hunting her. The first sign of pursuit came on her third day, a drone circling high enough that most people would never have noticed it, running a search pattern that was unmistakably military. Wren had gone flat immediately, pulling her ghillie wrap tight, becoming part of the landscape itself. The drone passed 3 times, found nothing. She waited 2 full hours after it departed before she allowed herself to move again. On the 4th day, she heard the helicopter. Low and slow, a grid search pattern that suggested infinite patience and unlimited resources. She counted 3 passes before it shifted to a different sector. That gave her a rough sense of how many searchers were in the field and how long before the noose tightened enough to matter. Not long enough. By then the hail had thinned into something worse, a wet heavy snow that clung to every branch and stole sound from the forest floor, muffling footsteps and swallowing distance in a way that made the mountain feel smaller and far more dangerous at the same time. That night, lying in a shallow scrape she had dug with her bare hands, she made her decision. She could not outrun a hunt like this forever. Eventually they would box her in, and when they did, Ghost would be waiting with a clear shot and all the patience in the world. Her only real chance was to turn the hunt around. She spent 6 hours positioning herself, studying terrain she had memorized from old topographic maps during her planning phase, looking for the kind of ground a sniper would choose. High ground, clear sightlines, multiple ways out. She found 3 possibilities. The third one felt right, a ridge overlooking a valley that any search team would eventually have to cross. She built a false position 200 meters from the real one, arranging gear to suggest someone bedding down for the night, then moved to her true overwatch and waited. Ghost arrived 4 hours later. Wren never saw the approach, never heard footsteps or the small sounds that betray human presence. One moment the ridge was empty. The next, a shape existed there that had somehow always been there, blended so completely into the landscape that her eyes had passed over it a dozen times without recognition. Professional respect warred with the certainty of her own death. She had one chance, she took it. The shot went wide. The distance was wrong. The angle was worse. But she sent it anyway, a round that tore through the space where Ghost's head had been a fraction of a second earlier. A miss by inches. Ghost moved like smoke. Gone before Ren could chamber a second round. Vanished into terrain that swallowed people whole and kept them. Ren did not wait to see where she had gone. She ran. That had been 2 days ago, or maybe 3. The wound had come during her retreat from that failed shot, a single round finding her through and through, low on her left side, no warning, no sound of the shot itself, only sudden impact and the terrible knowledge that she had been hit. Through and through, missed anything vital, both true, both irrelevant to how much it hurt. She had packed the wound and kept moving, because stopping meant dying, and she had not yet decided to die. Now tucked into the shattered bunkers with heavy snow falling silent above her where the hail had been only hours before, Ren assessed her situation with the cold clarity that pain eventually brings. Alone, wounded, hunted by someone with 4 decades of confirmed kills behind her. No communication, no extraction, no backup coming. But she had 2 things Ghost did not know about. She had memorized the locations of all 12 Palisade caches. And somewhere in these mountains, a search team called Timberwolf was hunting for something they did not yet understand they had already found. Her own people. She checked her rifle, soaked but functional. 11 rounds left. 11 chances to reach out across impossible distance and touch someone who believed she was safe. She closed her eyes and did the math out of pure habit the way some people pray. Distance to the North Ridge, where Ghost would already be setting up again. Wind at her own position. Wind at altitude, faster, colder. Barometric pressure falling with the storm front rolling through. The shot was possible, barely. They came at dawn. 6 shapes moving through frozen timber with the careful precision of men who understood they were standing inside someone else's kill zone. Ren heard them before she saw them. The small sounds equipment always makes no matter how much training tries to eliminate it. She watched through her scope as they approached, reading formation, reading role. Point man, young, alert, moving fast and low. Team leader, older, deliberate, calling silent hand signals with economy of motion that spoke of real combat experience. A medic carrying an oversized pack. Rear security, constantly checking the back trail. And one more figure, older than the rest by decades, moving with the careful conservation of energy that only comes from a lifetime spent understanding exactly how much a body has left to give. Not standard loadout, not standing in formation like the others, an advisor or a specialist, someone brought along for knowledge rather than firepower. The point man raised a closed fist. The team froze. They had seen her. Ren knew every rule of engagement said she should announce herself immediately, identify as friendly, do any of a dozen things tactical doctrine demanded in exactly this situation. Instead, she passed out. The wound, the blood loss, 4 days of running on nothing but adrenaline and stubbornness finally collected their debt all at once. The world softened at the edges, then dimmed, then disappeared entirely. Her last conscious thought was a single fragile hope that she had guessed correctly about which side these men were on. When she woke, 6 faces were looking down at her. The team leader spoke first. His voice carried the calm, flat authority of someone delivering facts rather than opinions. Captain Idris Calder, we are Timberwolf. You are going to tell us very quickly why we should not restrain you and call this in as a hostile contact. Ren tried to sit up. Pain exploded through her side, bright and clarifying. A hand settled on her shoulder, not forceful, only present. The medic, Sergeant Milo Ashford, kept his voice low. Easy, through and through. I have it packed, but you are not stable. She studied each of them in turn. reading posture and expression, running the same silent calculations that would determine whether she lived or died in the next 60 seconds. Then her eyes found the older man standing slightly apart from the formation. He was studying her with an intensity that went far beyond professional interest, his gaze moving across her rifle case, her equipment, the careful selection of her position. "Colonel Pike," she said. Something shifted behind his eyes. "How do you know that?" "Because I have spent 18 months learning everything about Palisade, every name on the roster, every cache location, every general who is still selling what should have been destroyed 40 years ago." Silence settled over the group like a physical weight. Calder's voice carried a warning edge. "The brief on you says you went rogue, says you killed 3 recon teams yourself, says you are the exact threat we were sent up here to neutralize." Ren almost laughed, and it hurt, sending fresh fire through her wounded side, but she could not entirely stop it. "I did not kill anyone. Ghost did. She has been erasing witnesses for 2 weeks. Those 3 teams were investigating the same thing I was. Someone sold every one of us out." Pike crouched beside her, his eyes the pale, hard blue of a winter sky. "You know where the caches are?" It was not a question. "All 12, she said. "Memorized, because the moment I wrote them down, I became a target with an expiration date." Before anyone could respond, a sound cut through the timber, not close, not loud, but unmistakable to anyone who had spent real time in combat. A single high-powered rifle shot, distant, maybe 2 kilometers out. Something cracked and fell somewhere above the canopy line. "That is your drone," Ren said quietly. "Ghost just shot it down, which means she knows exactly where we are." Calder's jaw tightened. "How long?" 10 minutes, maybe less." The forest seemed to hold its breath around them. 6 professionals who understood exactly what a downed drone at that range actually meant. A shooter capable of hitting a moving aerial target at 2 kilometers was a shooter who could put a round through any one of them with surgical precision, and there was nowhere on this exposed slope to hide from that kind of math. They were standing inside a kill box, and every second they stayed still made it worse. Corporal Tanner spoke first, young, Montana raised, restless with adrenaline. "We need to move. Every second we stay here we are targets." "Move where?" Kilbride answered, scanning the tree line with the vigilance of a man who had survived too many ambushes to trust stillness. "We have 300 meters of open ground in every direction that matters. The second we break cover we become silhouettes." Ren pulled herself upright despite the protest screaming through her side. Ashford started to object, then simply moved to brace her back instead. "He is right," she said. "Ghost has had hours to map every route out of this valley. The moment any of you move, you die." "Then we call it in," Kilbride pressed. "Get support, something that makes her position untenable." Ren shook her head. "Radio is compromised. Whoever sold out those 3 teams still has access to tactical frequencies. Call for help and you are handing them our exact coordinates." Every eye in the group shifted toward Pike. The old colonel had gone quiet, his expression unreadable, weighing something none of them could see. When he finally spoke, his words came slow and deliberate, a man choosing sentences that would shape everything that happened next. "She is right about the caches. I was there when we buried them. 12 sites. Weapons that were supposed to be destroyed the day the Cold War ended." He paused. "I have spent 4 decades trying to convince myself that mission was justified. Necessary." "Was it?" Ren asked softly. "I do not know anymore. I was 27 years old. I followed orders. We all did." His eyes found hers, hard and steady. But if someone is selling that poison now, if an American general is getting rich off weapons that could kill thousands, then no. It was never justified, and it is nowhere close to finished. The professional distance between interrogator and subject dissolved into something else entirely. Recognition. Two people who had each given everything to a craft that demanded absolute discipline and promised nothing in return. "Tell me about Ghost," Pike said. Wren's mind reached for the pattern she had built over 2 weeks of running for her life while assembling a profile in her head. Real identity is almost certainly Petra Lindqvist. Former East German military, Cold War vintage. She would be 62 now. 30 years as a contractor since the wall came down. Confirmed kills into the dozens. Probably twice that many she was paid to keep quiet about. 62, Tanner repeated, skeptical. And she is still running counter-sniper operations in a Montana blizzard. She has killed 3 recon teams in 2 weeks, Wren said flatly. Age does not matter when you have been doing this since before most of you were born. She has forgotten more about long-range shooting than any of us will ever learn. Calder's question cut through the tension, aimed at Wren rather than his own team, because command had quietly shifted to whoever understood the threat best. So what do we do? Wren looked at her rifle case. 10 years of saved pay and thousands of hours behind a scope, compressed into a single object built to her exact specifications. "I take the shot," she said. Silence again. Then Tanner. "Ma'am, you can barely sit upright. You are talking about a shot past 3,000 meters in a blizzard with a chest wound." "I am talking about the only shot that keeps every one of you alive," Wren answered, her voice carrying the flat certainty of someone who had already done the math and accepted the answer. "Ghost is on that ridge right now waiting for one of you to move. The instant you do, she fires. Clean kill. 2 seconds. Then she repositions and waits for the next name on her list. She can do this all day. She is patient. She is exceptional. And she will kill every single one of you, unless someone reaches her first." Pike's question came quiet, stripped of doubt, only a request for information. "Can you make that shot?" Wren met his eyes. "Yes." One word, no qualification, no hedge. The kind of confidence that only comes from knowing exactly what you are capable of and exactly where the margin for error ends. "Then we spot for you," Pike said. "I have 40 years of terrain reading behind me. Between us, we can give you wind and range and atmosphere." Calder made the call, jaw set, voice final. "Do it. But we move her first. That ridge has direct sightline into this position." Wren had already mapped the terrain during her hours of crawling, cataloging every feature the way a chess player sees 3 moves ahead. 60 meters west, she said. 2 fallen trees braced against each other. Enough elevation change to break her sightline into our setup. "How do you know that?" Tanner asked. "Because I was planning to shoot from there myself before I passed out." Something shifted in Pike's expression. A brief nod between professionals who recognized competence without needing to say it aloud. "Let us move her." The next several minutes became an education in controlled pain. Wren directed her own movement, calling every shift of weight, every adjustment that would keep pressure off the wound while still holding operational security. Ashford stayed close, watching vitals that were quietly deteriorating with every passing minute. They reached the fallen trees. Kilbride and Tanner cleared the position while Calder held rear security. Pike began setting up the rifle himself, his movements careful, exact, the muscle memory of decades still living in his hands even after all this time. "You were a sniper," Wren said. "Statement, not question." "Marine Corps back in the day," Pike answered, adjusting the bipod with quiet precision. "Longest confirmed shot I ever took was 1,100 meters. thought I was hot stuff at the time. He studied the distance to the North Ridge, the driving snow, the wind moving through multiple layers of canopy between them and the target. This is a different universe entirely. Ren settled in behind the rifle, forced onto her right side to keep pressure off the wound, an awkward position that was nowhere close to ideal, but was still better than dead. Pike pulled out a small weather meter, the kind serious long-range hunters carry. Barometric pressure 29.6 and dropping, temperature 41 at our position. I would estimate 10 degrees colder at the ridge, more with wind chill factored in. Kilbride had a laser rangefinder up, painting the target area with invisible light. Range to suspected position, 3,500 meters, give or take 20. Ren ran the numbers in her head almost without effort, the calculations as familiar as breathing. At that distance, her round would spend more than 3 seconds in flight. Gravity alone would pull it down 52 feet from point of aim. Wind could push it laterally anywhere from 6 inches to 1.5 feet depending on velocity and angle. Temperature would change air density, which would change drag, which would change everything downstream of it. And she would be solving all of it with a chest wound that made every single breath an act of discipline. "I need 5 minutes," she said quietly. "No one talk, no one move, I need to read this ground." They gave her the silence. Ren put her eye to the scope and began the work, first locating the position not by searching for ghosts directly, which would be pointless, but by reading terrain the way she would have read it herself. High ground, cover from return fire, clean sightlines into the valley below. There, just below the ridgeline, a slight irregularity in the standing snowmelt, a subtle distortion where something was displacing the pooled runoff, changing how it drained. A human body, prone, absolutely still. She had her target. Now came the harder part. Wind at her own position, 8 from the west. At mid-range, closer to 12, shifting northwest. At the ridge itself, likely 15 or more, coming hard off higher peaks. She would need to hold nearly 4 feet left just to account for drift. Pike spoke softly, adding data without breaking her focus. Coriolis at this latitude will push your round right. You will need to compensate. Ren made a single adjustment on the windage turret. A small mechanical click that sounded enormous in the silence, a promise that the rifle was ready even if the rest of the world was not. Her breathing slowed into the rhythm she had trained for a decade to perfect. 4 seconds in, hold 2. 4 seconds out, hold 2. The window of absolute stillness that made everything else possible. Her finger found the trigger. 2 pounds of pressure, smooth, continuous, no anticipation, no flinch, only the patient application of force until the mechanical event happened on its own and the rifle finally spoke for her. She did not fire yet. There was something else she needed first, something no instrument could measure and no calculation could reach. She needed to understand the person on the other end of this shot. Ren closed her eyes for 1/2 second and thought about what it meant to spend 3 decades as a professional killer, to wake every morning and know your purpose was to end lives from distances where you never had to see a single face, to be good enough, patient enough, cold enough that it became a profession instead of a wound. Someone disciplined, someone who had built habits and preferences across decades of repetition. Someone favoring one shoulder over the other because of some old injury nobody remembered anymore. She opened her eyes and studied the water distortion again. Slightly left of the rock formation center. Support side favored, which meant a right-handed shooter holding the rifle canted slightly left to maintain a natural point of aim. And right-handed shooters who favored left side support made one specific, almost invisible error at extreme range. They aimed slightly high and left. Wren adjusted her point of aim 4 inches right and 2 inches low from where pure mathematics said the shot belonged, betting everything on the idea that Ghost was human enough to make the same small mistake every human eventually made. Pike noticed the shift immediately. You are correcting off the calculated solution. She favors left support, Wren said. I can see it in the water. The water does not lie. A pause. Then Pike's voice again, quieter now, carrying something close to respect. Your shot, your call. Her breathing reached the bottom of its cycle. Respiratory pause. The 2-second window where her entire body went absolutely still. She pressed the trigger. The rifle spoke, recoil driving hard into her shoulder, sending fresh pain screaming through her wounded side, bright and clean. The scope picture washed out in the muzzle blast, then settled again as the rifle came back down. She stayed on target, did not move her head, did not break position. 3.5 seconds. The bullet climbing through driving snow, fighting through layer after layer of shifting wind, dropping 52 feet under gravity's patient, unbroken pull. 3.5 seconds, where 6 people forgot how to breathe. Then Tanner's voice, flat and factual. Movement stopped. Top of the secondary feature. Something changed up there. Kilbride was already on the spotting scope at maximum magnification. Confirm. Disruption in the target area. Debris pattern consistent with impact. Pike looked at her, his expression carrying something none of the others had shown her yet. Belief. Did you hit? Calder asked, needing certainty before he made his next call. Wren was still looking through her own scope, watching snow blur across 3,500 meters of impossible distance, unable to resolve fine detail even through the best glass money could buy. But she had felt it, the moment of connection that only exists for shooters who have spent a lifetime learning to feel a shot before anyone else can confirm it. Yes, she said. Calder pulled a small backup drone from his pack and launched it with a sharp flick of his wrist. It climbed fast, camera angling north, and on the small tablet screen in his hand, the feed slowly resolved into focus. The rock formation came into view, the natural defilade that should have hidden a prone shooter completely. And at its base, something invisible from 3,000 meters, but unmistakable from 300 feet of altitude. A shape, prone, still in the particular way that only 2 kinds of things are ever still. Silence spread across the group like something physical. Then from somewhere far to the east, past the ridge, past the shape lying motionless in the snow, a second signal cut through the storm. Not a rifle shot this time. A radio transmission, encrypted, barely audible through static, breaking into Calder's channel from a frequency none of them recognized. Team Timberwolf, this is oversight. Do not engage further. Repeat, do not engage. Lethal force against the target is not authorized. Calder's face went completely still. Wren felt something cold settle behind her ribs that had nothing to do with the wound. Someone was giving orders to protect a woman who had just tried to kill 6 people. Someone who wanted Ghost taken alive. Who authenticated that order? She asked quietly. Calder checked the code scrolling across his handset, and whatever he found there drained the color from his face. Defense Acquisition and Technology, he said. General Ashcombe's office. The forest held perfectly still around them, snow falling silent through broken canopy, the shape on the ridge not moving, the war far from over, and somewhere out there in the driving white, the truth still waiting to be dragged into the light. The radio transmission still hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Do not engage. Lethal force against the target is not authorized. Calder stared at his handset as though it had betrayed him personally, his knuckles white around the casing. Ren kept her eye pressed to the scope, watching the shape on the distant ridge, waiting for it to move again, waiting for the lie in what she had just heard to reveal itself. Someone in Ashcombe's office wanted the woman who had just tried to kill 6 men taken alive. That single fact told her more than any confession ever could. Ashcombe is trying to save her, Pike said quietly, still crouched beside the rifle. If Ghost gets pulled in by defense acquisition instead of by federal law enforcement, whatever she knows about who hired her disappears into a classified vault forever. And so does whatever she could tell us about him. Radio is compromised, Ren said, her voice flat with certainty. That order did not come from anyone with the authority to give it. It came from a man protecting himself. Kilbride crushed the encryption module of the backup radio under his boot without waiting to be asked, the small crack of plastic sounding almost satisfying in the tense quiet. Radio malfunction, he said. Never received the order. Calder looked at his team, at the drone footage still glowing on his tablet, at Ren behind the rifle with blood soaking slowly through her field dressing. Command decision. Follow instructions from a chain that might already be compromised, or trust the woman they had been sent up this mountain to eliminate. Get her off that ridge before anyone else arrives, he said finally. We are not leaving a professional killer alive for someone to quietly disappear. They moved as a unit, tighter now, faster, 6 people bound together by a decision that could not be undone. Tanner took point again, young legs eating up the frozen ground, eyes scanning for anything that did not belong. Ashford stayed close to Ren, supporting her weight without making it obvious he was doing so, watching her face for the particular gray tone that meant blood pressure was dropping faster than her willpower could compensate for. Before they moved off the ridge entirely, Ren pulled a scrap of waterproof paper from her vest and wrote 5 words in block letters with a grease pencil, wedging it beneath a rock at the false position where Ghost would eventually search for confirmation of her own kill. 0 kills. Ask why. She did not explain the gesture to anyone, and no one asked. Some messages were not meant for the people standing beside her. Ren vanished into the tree line behind a wall of granite, moving under her own power despite the limp, and for one disorienting moment Calder lost sight of her completely, the shape of the rock swallowing her whole against the white backdrop of the storm. Calder's radio crackled again, this time on a frequency his team actually trusted, Fairweather's voice cutting through with the particular urgency of someone who had been trying to reach him for hours. Timberwolf, this is Fairweather, Justice Department liaison. I need confirmation you have not engaged the target on the North Ridge. I have new information and it changes everything. Calder answered low, watching the tree line. Go ahead. The financial trail on General Ashcombe just widened. He is not the only signature on those transfers. There is a second authorization chain running through his office, dated 18 months ago, and it does not match his handwriting or his access codes. Someone else inside Defense Acquisition has been moving money too. Someone who outranks him. Calder's jaw tightened. You are saying Ashcombe has a partner. I am saying Ashcombe might not be the top of this chain at all, Fairweather answered. I am saying whoever gave that stand-down order might not have been protecting him. They might have been protecting themselves. The radio went quiet, and Calder stood there a long moment in the driving snow, recalculating everything he thought he understood about the mission he had been sent to complete. Meanwhile, half a mile east, on the ridge where the impossible shot had landed, something moved that should not have moved at all. The prone shape in the snow shifted, slow, deliberate, and rose into a crouch that no dying body should have been capable of producing. Petra Lindqvist pulled a torn strip of fabric away from her shoulder, where the round had grazed close enough to spin her but not close enough to kill. 6 decades of surviving worse than this had taught her exactly how much damage a body could absorb and keep functioning. She had felt the shot coming a half-second before it arrived. Some old animal instinct honed across 30 years of contracts, and she had rolled at the exact moment the round crossed the last 100 meters of its flight. It had been close, closer than anything in a very long time. Someone down there could shoot. She crawled toward the false position and found the scrap of waterproof paper wedged beneath the rock, the block letters still legible despite the snow already gathering across its surface. 0 kills. Ask why. Petra read it twice, something unfamiliar moving behind her expression, a professional insult and a genuine question tangled together in 5 short words left by a woman who had just missed a killing shot on purpose. Her handler's voice crackled faintly through her earpiece, the encrypted channel that connected her to the people who had hired her for this contract in the first place. Confirm status, the voice said, cold, clipped, unmistakably not American. Client reports possible complication. Extraction team inbound to your position within the hour. Extraction, Petra repeated quietly into the microphone. I was not informed of an extraction team. I was informed I would be paid upon confirmed kill and then released from contract. A pause on the line that told her everything she needed to know before the answer came. Client has revised terms. You are to be retrieved, not released. Petra Lindqvist had spent 30 years reading exactly this kind of silence, the particular texture of a lie dressed up as procedure. Retrieved was a word men used when they meant something closer to silenced. She had outlived every partner, every handler, every client who had ever tried to make her disappear once her usefulness expired, and she intended to keep outliving them. Understood, she said, and switched the channel off entirely. Someone was trying to erase her the same way she had been hired to erase 3 reconnaissance teams and 1 stubborn woman with a rifle. The irony was not lost on her. For the first time in longer than she cared to admit, Petra Lindqvist found herself uncertain which side of this operation she actually belonged to. Back near the fallen bunkers, Wren had reached a low ridge overlooking a narrow ravine that Pike had spotted on an old survey map decades earlier, back when this land still had a purpose the government was willing to admit to. Something down there did not match the terrain around it, a shape too regular to be natural, half buried under decades of pine needles and collapsed rock. A steel door, rusted almost solid, set into the hillside like something the mountain had tried very hard to forget. Tanner reached it first, running gloved fingers along the frame. This is not on any decommissioning survey I have ever seen. Because it was never supposed to be found, Pike said quietly, staring at the door with an expression none of them had seen on him before, something close to dread. Ashford forced the mechanism with a pry bar from his kit, metal shrieking against 30 years of rust, and the door finally gave way with a groan that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside the mountain itself. Beyond it, a narrow concrete corridor dropped into darkness, air stale and cold, and completely undisturbed by decades of snow and silence above. They moved in with weapons raised, flashlights cutting narrow cones through dust that had not been touched in a generation. The corridor opened into a small chamber, empty crates stacked against one wall, rusted equipment scattered across a floor thick with grime. And in the far corner, chained to a support beam, a figure that had clearly once been a man. Thin beyond description, hair gone entirely white, eyes squinting against light they had not seen in longer than any of them wanted to guess. He flinched hard at the sudden brightness, raising a trembling hand as though the flashlight beams themselves might strike him. Please, the man rasped, voice cracked from disuse. Please do not. Ashford was at his side instantly, checking a pulse that felt impossibly faint beneath paper-thin skin. "Sir, we are American forces. You are safe now. Can you tell me your name?" The man's eyes moved slowly across the group, lingering on each face as though searching for someone he half remembered from a different lifetime. When his gaze reached Pike, something shifted behind them, a flicker of recognition buried under 40 years of darkness. "Garrison," the man whispered. Pike went completely still, color draining from his face as though he had seen a ghost standing in front of him instead of a chained and starving prisoner. "Elias," he said, barely above a whisper. "My God, Elias Nor." "You know him?" Calder asked, though the answer was already written across Pike's face. "He was my spotter," Pike said, voice unsteady in a way none of them had heard from him before. 1986. We were part of the burial detail for Palisade. He disappeared during the final cash placement. Official records said he deserted. I spent years believing that. I told myself that for 4 decades. "He did not desert," Wren said quietly, understanding arriving all at once with the terrible clarity of a puzzle finally solving itself. He saw something he was not supposed to see, and someone decided it was easier to bury a witness than to bury a weapon. Nor's cracked voice found something close to strength. "Ashcombe," he rasped. "Young lieutenant then. He falsified the burial coordinates on 3 of the caches. Sold the real locations later, I think, though I never lived long enough on the surface to prove it. He caught me watching him alter the manifest. I have been down here ever since." The chamber went utterly silent, except for the wind howling somewhere far above them through the broken door. 40 years, Pike said, and the words seemed to cost him something physical. 40 years I told myself you ran. I would have run, nor whispered if they had given me the chance. Wren felt something cold settle through her chest that had nothing to do with blood loss. This was never only about weapons. Ashcombe had been protecting a decades-old murder that had somehow become a decades-long imprisonment instead, because dead men occasionally get found and investigated, but forgotten men in sealed bunkers simply become nothing at all. "We need to move him," Ashford said, already unwrapping emergency supplies from his pack. "His vitals are critical. He needs fluids and warmth immediately, or we lose him in the next hour regardless of anything else happening on this mountain." Calder's radio crackled again, Fairweather's voice returning, tighter now, more urgent. "Timberwolf, be advised, satellite imagery shows a second aircraft inbound to your grid coordinates, ETA approximately 40 minutes. Configuration does not match standard military extraction. I believe this is Ashcombe attempting to reach the site before either of us can secure it." "He is trying to erase the bunker," Wren said, understanding landing with terrible weight, or whoever is in it. Above them, on the ridge where Petra Lindqvist had spent 30 years surviving exactly this kind of betrayal, a decision was quietly being made that would change the entire shape of the hunt. She had listened to enough of the chatter bleeding across compromised frequencies to understand the broad strokes of what was happening below her. A prisoner, a general with something buried literally and figuratively beneath this mountain. A client who now wanted her retrieved rather than released, which in her professional experience meant a bullet somewhere quiet and a story that explained nothing. And 5 words on a scrap of waterproof paper that would not leave her thoughts. Petra Lindqvist had never once in 30 years allowed a client to make that choice for her. She began moving down from the ridge, rifle slung across her back rather than raised, an action that would have seemed suicidal to anyone who understood who she was and what she had already done to 3 American reconnaissance teams, and very nearly to Wren Sutter herself. Back inside the bunker, Ashford worked fast, an IV line finding a vein in Nor's wasted arm with practiced efficiency, while Kilbride and Tanner set up a defensive perimeter at the entrance. weapons trained on the tree line beyond the shattered door. Wren sat against the cold concrete wall, her own wound throbbing in time with her pulse, watching Pike kneel beside the man he had spent 4 decades believing had abandoned him. "I am sorry," Pike said quietly, words that seemed entirely inadequate for the weight they were meant to carry. "I should have looked harder. I should have never believed the easy answer." Nor's cracked lips shaped something that might have once been a smile. "You came back," he whispered. "That is more than most men manage in a lifetime." Wren closed her eyes for a half-second, and in the darkness behind her eyelids, a memory surfaced uninvited, triggered by the particular sound of Ashford's voice speaking low reassurance to a frightened man in the dark. The exact cadence her own instructor had once used in a training bunker very much like this one. "Fire and vanish," her instructor's voice said in memory, flat and certain, "the way you fire when there is no room left for hesitation. You do not wait to see the result. You trust the work you already did and you move." She opened her eyes, the flashback gone as quickly as it had arrived, no more than a breath of memory, and reached for her rifle with hands that had suddenly found new purpose despite the pain screaming through her side. "We have less than 40 minutes before Ashcombe's aircraft arrives," she said, voice steady despite everything her body was telling her to stop. "And somewhere out there Ghost is still on this mountain, and I do not know any more whether she is hunting us or running from the same people we are running from." As if summoned by the thought itself, Kilbride's voice cut sharp from the entrance. "Movement. Tree line, north quadrant. One individual, no visible weapon raised." Every rifle in the chamber swung toward the door. Petra Lindqvist stepped into the pale gray light at the bunker entrance. Hands visible, empty, rifle still slung harmlessly across her back, blood soaking one shoulder of her ghillie wrap where Wren's round had grazed her. "I am not here to finish what I started," she said, her accented voice carrying clearly across the frozen ground between them. "I am here because the men who hired me have decided I am worth less alive than dead, and I imagine you have already reached the same understanding about your own situation." Nobody lowered a weapon. Petra's eyes moved past the rifles entirely, settling instead on Wren with something that might have been professional curiosity or something considerably closer to respect. "That shot from the ridge, 3,500 meters, wounded in a blizzard. I have taken contracts for 30 years, and I have never once seen anyone survive being on the receiving end of a shot like that, let alone deliver one themselves. And I found your note." "You should be dead," Wren said flatly. "So should you," Petra answered. "And yet here we both remain. 0 kills. Not what I expected to find written in the snow by someone who could have ended me twice over." Calder's voice carried the hard edge of a man who had already lost patience with impossible situations. "Give me one reason not to put you down where you stand." "Because in less than half an hour, an aircraft is coming to erase every single person in this bunker," Petra said, calm as still water. "Including me. Including the general who thinks he is still in control of this operation. I know things about the chain above Ashcombe that your investigation has not reached yet. I have been paid by people whose names would make your Justice Department liaison very interested indeed." Wren studied her carefully, reading the same small details she had once used to calculate a wind hold across 3 kilometers of empty air. The blood loss that should have slowed her and had not. The eyes that carried decades of calculation behind them. A woman who had survived every attempt anyone had ever made to discard her once her usefulness ended. "She is telling the truth," Wren said quietly, "about the timeline if nothing else." Pike rose slowly from beside Nor, his own expression unreadable in a way Wren had not seen from him before. Something old and complicated moving behind his eyes, as he studied the woman standing in the doorway. "I know that stance," he said softly, "that exact economy of movement. I have seen it before, a very long time ago, in a different training program that officially never existed." Petra's eyes found his, and for just a moment something flickered across her face that looked almost like recognition arriving from somewhere very far away. "You trained counter-sniper doctrine for foreign liaison programs in the late 70s, she said slowly, each word arriving like a piece falling into place. "Before the wall came down, I remember an American instructor, younger than you are now, obviously, but the voice does not change the way a face does." Pike's expression went very still. That was classified beyond anything that should exist in any surviving record. "I was 19 years old," Petra said. "You taught patience before precision. You taught us to read water before we ever touched a rifle. I have used that lesson more times across 30 years than I can count." The chamber fell into a silence heavier than anything the storm outside could produce. 6 people, and one dying man absorbing the impossible weight of a truth none of them had been prepared to hear. The teacher and the student standing on opposite sides of a war that had somehow never actually ended, only changed uniforms and employers across 4 decades of quiet, unbroken bloodshed. "We do not have time for this," Calder said finally, breaking the silence with the flat authority of command. "Aircraft inbound in under 30 minutes. We have a critical prisoner, 6 operators, and now apparently a hostile asset claiming to switch sides. I need a plan, not a reunion." Wren pulled herself to her feet, using the wall for support, pain screaming through every movement but her voice steady despite it. "We use the terrain the same way we already have. Ghost knows this mountain better than anyone alive except possibly Colonel Pike. If Ashcombe is sending an aircraft to erase the evidence and everyone connected to it, then we need to control exactly what that aircraft finds when it arrives." "What did you have in mind?" Petra asked, and there was something in her tone that suggested professional interest rather than mere cooperation. "We let them think they succeeded," Wren said. "We staged this exactly the way I staged my own position on that ridge. A false scene that tells the story they want to believe, while the real position waits somewhere they are not looking." Pike studied her for a long moment, something like pride moving behind his tired eyes. "You want to bait a general's private extraction team the same way you baited a professional assassin." "It worked once," Wren said simply. Before anyone could respond further, Ashford's voice cut through the tension, sharp with alarm from where he knelt beside Noor. "His pressure is crashing. We need to move him now, gentle as possible, but now." Kilbride helped lift the fragile man onto an improvised litter fashioned from a poncho and 2 rifle slings, careful of every fracture and old injury that 4 decades of chains had likely left behind. Noor's cloudy eyes found Pike's one last time before the movement began. "The evidence," he rasped. "Ledger. Behind the 3rd crate. I kept records the whole time. Every cache location Ashcombe falsified. Every payment I overheard through these walls. I could not run, but I could remember." Pike's hands were not entirely steady as he pulled the crate aside and found a small waterproof case hidden beneath. Decades of dust settling away to reveal handwriting gone faint, but still legible across dozens of pages. 4 decades of silence," he whispered, "and this entire time you were still fighting." "It was the only weapon they left me," Noor answered, and his eyes closed, consciousness slipping away from exhaustion and relief in equal measure. Wren looked at Petra Lindqvist standing in the doorway, blood still soaking her shoulder, 30 years of violence written into every line of her face, and made a decision that went against every instinct her training had ever given her. "Help us move him out," she said, "and then help us finish this properly, because I do not think either of us actually wants the same ending anymore." Petra studied her for a long moment, some old calculation running behind her eyes that Ren could not entirely read. "3 teams, and you had every opportunity to end mine on that ridge, and you chose the wound instead of the kill," she said finally, quiet, almost to herself. "I have spent 30 years assuming everyone eventually reaches for the easier ending. You did not." "I do not need more bodies," Ren said. "I need the truth to survive long enough to matter." Something shifted behind Petra's expression, decades of hardened calculation giving way, just slightly, to something that might once have been called conscience before the world had spent so long grinding it down. "Then let us give it a chance to matter," she said, and reached for the second rifle case Kilbride had recovered from the storage crates along the wall. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to thin, pale winter light breaking weakly through the clouds, and somewhere above the ridge, a distant engine sound began to gather in the wind, growing steadily louder with every passing second. Calder's radio crackled one final time before they moved, Fairweather's voice arriving through static thick with urgency. "Timberwolf, be advised, I have pulled Ashcombe's complete authorization trail. The second signature above him belongs to someone with far higher clearance than anyone in this chain expected. I cannot confirm the identity yet, but whoever it is has access that goes well beyond defense acquisition." Calder looked at Wren, at Pike, at the dying man on the litter, and the assassin now standing among them carrying a second rifle instead of aiming her first. "Then we had better make certain we survive long enough to find out who it is," he said. The engine sound grew louder overhead, cutting through the thinning storm, and 6 people who had started this mountain as enemies, prisoners, and hunters now moved together into position, none of them entirely certain anymore which side of the war they actually stood on, only certain that the truth still had not finished demanding its price. The engine sound grew from a distant murmur into something with weight and direction, a fixed-wing aircraft banking low over the ridgeline, running dark, no lights, no transponder signal that any of them could pick up on Calder's handset. Whoever was flying it had done this kind of work before. Wren stood at the mouth of the bunker with Petra Lindqvist beside her, an arrangement that would have seemed impossible 3 hours earlier, and now felt like the only logical outcome of everything that had happened on this mountain. Behind them, Ashford and Kilbride carried Nor's litter deeper into the tree line, moving as fast as a critically unstable patient could be moved without killing him outright. "We stage it the same way I staged the ridge," Wren said, watching the aircraft bank again, clearly scanning for a landing approach rather than committing to a drop. "False position. Something that satisfies whoever is watching without costing us anything real." Petra studied the terrain with the flat professional focus of someone who had spent 3 decades reading exactly this kind of ground. "There," she said, pointing toward a shallow depression near the bunker entrance where old debris had already created the rough silhouette of bodies left behind. "We arrange gear to suggest casualties. Enough disorder to suggest the bunker was already cleared by force before they arrived. It buys time, nothing more." "Time is what we need," Pike said, kneeling beside the small waterproof case that held 4 decades of a dying man's silent testimony. "If Fairweather can authenticate this ledger before that aircraft lands, we do not need to win a firefight. We only need to survive long enough for the truth to outrun the bullet." Calder's radio crackled once more, Fairweather's voice thinner now, stretched by distance and urgency. "Timberwolf, I have partial confirmation on the second authorization signature. It does not belong to anyone in defense acquisition. It traces back to the Armed Services Oversight Committee itself. I need more time to confirm the name completely, but Ashcombe was never the top of this chain. He was protecting someone above him the entire time." Wren felt something cold settle behind her ribs that had nothing to do with blood loss. $44 million, 3 dead reconnaissance teams, 4 decades of a man buried alive in the dark, and somehow the truth still had one more layer beneath it that none of them had yet been allowed to see. "How long until you have a name?" Calder asked. "I need the ledger," Fairweather answered. "Physical documentation trumps everything I can pull from encrypted financial records. Whatever Nor wrote down in that bunker may be the only thing that survives a courtroom challenge." "Then we protect the ledger before we protect ourselves," Wren said, and nobody in the group argued the point. The aircraft banked a final time and began its descent into a narrow clearing 400 meters east of the bunker, exactly where Wren had calculated it would need to land given the terrain and the wind. 6 figures disembarked before the engine had even finished cycling down, moving with the disciplined efficiency of men who did this kind of erasure work for a living, rather than out of any personal conviction. Petra watched them through a small pair of field glasses recovered from her own gear, her expression unreadable. "Private contractors," she said quietly. "Not military, not law enforcement. The kind of men who get paid in cash and never ask what happened to the people they were sent to clean up after." Wren settled behind her rifle at the false position they had built, Petra beside her at a second firing point they had established using the same terrain reading instincts that had once made them enemies instead of allies. Below them, the 6 contractors fanned out toward the bunker entrance with weapons raised, moving through the stage debris field with growing confusion as they realized the scene did not match whatever briefing they had been given. One of them knelt beside the arranged wreckage, radioing back to someone Wren could not hear. She watched through her scope as his posture shifted, uncertainty replacing the confident approach he had walked in with. "They think we are already dead," Petra murmured, "which means whoever sent them expected a clean scene, not a battlefield puzzle. That buys us maybe 10 minutes before they figure out it is staged," Wren answered. 10 minutes was exactly what Fairweather needed. Deep in the tree line, Ashford had stabilized Nor enough to keep his pulse from disappearing entirely, the old man drifting in and out of consciousness, with the particular fragility of someone who had spent 40 years being kept alive only so someone else's secret could stay buried. Pike knelt beside him, the small case containing the ledger pressed against his chest like something sacred. "You are going to survive this," Pike said quietly, though the words carried the uncertain weight of a promise he was not entirely sure he could keep. Nor's eyes opened halfway, finding Pike's face in the gray winter light. "You already gave me something better than survival," he whispered. "You came back for the truth. That is enough." Below, one of the contractors had begun moving toward the tree line with the careful, deliberate steps of a man who suspected he was being watched. Wren tracked him through her scope, calculating angle and distance out of old habit rather than immediate necessity, waiting to see whether restraint would still be possible, or whether the next several minutes would demand a different kind of arithmetic entirely. Petra's voice came low beside her. "You are hesitating." "I do not need more bodies," Wren said. "I told you that already." "Then we need something better than bodies," Petra answered, and reached for the small transmitter Calder had handed her earlier, a device recovered from the contractor's own dropped equipment during their initial staged scene. She keyed the frequency and spoke in a flat, accented tone that mimicked the cold professional register these men would expect from their own employer. "Team, hold position. Confirm target status before proceeding further. Command wants visual confirmation before extraction completes." For 3 full seconds nothing happened. Then, remarkably, the advancing contractor stopped moving, radioing back a confirmation request of his own, buying exactly the kind of confusion that 6 armed professionals needed most in an operation where nobody actually understood who was really in charge anymore. "It will not last," Petra said. "Men like this eventually stop trusting a voice they cannot verify." "It only needs to last long enough," Wren answered. Calder's radio crackled one final time, and this time Fairweather's voice carried an edge that had not been there before, something between triumph and dread arriving together in the same breath. "I have the name," she said. "The second signature belongs to Senator Marguerite Colvin, ranking member of the Armed Services Oversight Committee. She has been covering for Ashcombe for 6 years, and based on what I am seeing in these financial records, she has profited from the same weapons sales he has. This goes all the way to Capitol Hill." The forest seemed to hold its breath around all of them at once. "A senator," Calder repeated, as though saying it aloud might somehow make the scale of it easier to absorb. "I need that ledger authenticated within the hour," Fairweather continued. "If I can cross-reference Knorr's handwritten record against the financial trail I already have, this becomes an airtight case that no defense attorney in the country can dismantle. But I cannot do that from here. I need him alive, and I need that ledger in federal custody before anyone connected to Colvin realizes what has actually been recovered on that mountain." Pike looked down at the fragile man beside him, 40 years of imprisonment written into every line of his wasted body, and made a decision that seemed to cost him something physical to speak aloud. "Then we move him now," he said. "Whatever risk that carries, the alternative is worse." Wren kept her eye on the scope, watching the contractors below slowly regroup near the bunker entrance, their confusion beginning to curdle into something more dangerous as radio silence stretched past what any of them would tolerate for long. "We need a distraction," she said. "Something loud enough to pull their attention away from the tree line while Ashford gets Knorr clear." Petra was already moving before Wren finished the sentence, reaching for a signal flare recovered from the contractor's own equipment cache. "I know exactly how to make professionals doubt themselves," she said. "I have spent 30 years learning precisely that skill." She fired the flare high over the false position they had built, a brilliant streak of red light arcing across the gray sky, and the effect below was immediate. Every contractor spun toward the new signal, weapons rising, radio chatter exploding into confused, overlapping voices that no longer resembled coordinated professionals at all. "Now," Wren said. Ashford and Kilbride moved Knorr's litter through the tree line at a pace that seemed impossible given the terrain, Tanner running point ahead of them, clearing a path through undergrowth thick with snow, Calder covering their retreat with his rifle raised toward the confusion still unfolding near the bunker. Wren held her position at the false firing point, watching through her scope as one contractor finally broke from the group and began moving directly toward the tree line where the litter team had just vanished. She adjusted her aim without conscious thought, the old calculations arriving instantly: distance, wind, angle, all of it resolving into a single clean solution that would end exactly one life permanently. Her finger found the trigger, then stopped. Petra's voice came quiet beside her. "You are still hesitating." "I am deciding," Wren said. She shifted her aim at the last possible instant, sending a round through the stock of the contractor's own weapon instead of through his chest, a shot that required precision far beyond what killing him outright would have demanded. The rifle shattered in his hands, and he dropped to the snow-clutching fingers that had absorbed the shock of the impact, alive, disarmed, and completely out of the fight. "0 kills," Petra said softly, something like wonder entering her voice for the first time since Wren had met her. "Even now, even with everything on the line." "I told you already," Wren answered. "I do not need more bodies. I need the truth to survive, and truth does not need corpses to prove itself. The remaining contractors scattered into disorganized retreat as their radio chatter finally connected the staged scene, the flare, and the sudden disarming shot into a picture that made continuing the operation look far more costly than whatever payment had been promised for completing it. Within minutes, the aircraft's engine cycled back to life, and it lifted off the narrow clearing without any of its passengers, abandoning 6 of its own team scattered through the snow rather than risk further engagement against an enemy they no longer understood. Wren allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of stillness before pulling herself upright, pain screaming through her side with every movement, and began the slow, deliberate walk down toward the tree line where the rest of Timberwolf waited with Nor, the ledger, and a truth that had just outrun a bullet by less than an hour. The helicopter that finally answered Fairweather's emergency channel arrived 18 minutes later, unmarked, flying low and fast, the particular configuration of an aircraft that existed on no official flight manifest anywhere in the federal system. Pike recognized the pilot immediately, a favor called in from 4 decades of accumulated trust that asked no questions when it mattered most. They loaded Nor onto a stretcher assembled from ponchos and rifle slings, Ashford maintaining the IV line with the same careful attention he had shown since the moment they found him chained in the dark. As they lifted him toward the open door, his cloudy eyes found Pike one final time. "The ledger," he rasped. "Make sure it reaches someone who cannot be bought." "It already has," Pike said, and meant it completely. Wren climbed aboard last, her own wound finally beginning to demand the kind of attention she had refused to give it for 4 days straight, and looked back at Petra Lindqvist, standing alone in the clearing below, blood still soaking one shoulder of her ghillie wrap. 30 years of violence written into every line of a face that had somehow found something worth protecting in the final hours of a contract that was never supposed to end this way. "You are not coming," Wren said. It was not quite a question. Petra shook her head slowly. "I have spent 30 years surviving exactly the kind of system you are about to hand yourself over to for protection. I do not trust it, and I do not think it would know what to do with someone like me even if I offered myself willingly." She paused, something almost gentle moving behind her hardened expression. "But I will remember what you did today. 0 kills, when every instinct in this profession says otherwise. I have never once seen that in 30 years of contracts." "Then let us hope you remember it long enough to choose it yourself someday," Wren answered. Petra Lindqvist offered nothing more than a slow, deliberate nod before turning and disappearing into the tree line, moving with the same impossible silence that had once made her invisible on a ridge 3,500 meters away. Nobody in the helicopter spoke as the rotors lifted them off the mountain, watching the last visible trace of her vanish into timber that had swallowed people before and would likely swallow her again, this time by her own choosing rather than anyone else's design. The debrief that followed consumed the better part of 9 hours inside a secure federal facility whose exact location Wren was never told and never asked about. She spoke without notes, without hesitation, walking Fairweather through 18 months of investigation compressed into a single continuous account, while doctors worked on the wound in her side between sessions, stabilizing what 4 days of wilderness survival had nearly cost her permanently. Nor's ledger, once cross-referenced against the financial trail Fairweather had already assembled, produced exactly the airtight case she had hoped for. Every falsified cash location matched a corresponding payment. Every payment matched a shell company. Every shell company eventually led back to 2 signatures instead of 1. General Ashcombe and Senator Colvin. 4 decades of buried weapons and buried witnesses, finally dragged into daylight by the stubborn persistence of a man who had spent 40 years in the dark with nothing but memory as his only weapon. 3 weeks later, the news broke across every major outlet in the country. Lieutenant General Roland Ashcombe, arrested on charges of conspiracy, arms trafficking, and violation of federal weapons statutes. Senator Marguerite Colvin, implicated in a cover-up that stretched back 6 years. Her resignation from the Armed Services Committee announced within 72 hours of the first indictment. The chemical weapons angle stayed sealed in classified annexes, the public version describing conventional arms sold to prohibited buyers, rather than the full scope of what had actually been buried beneath Wolf Creek proving ground for 4 decades. The public did not need to know how close American soil had come to becoming the source of a nerve agent attack on its own allies. Some truths served justice better when their full weight stayed contained. Elias Nor survived his recovery, though doctors were careful never to promise more than cautious optimism given everything his body had endured across 40 years of imprisonment. Pike visited him every week without exception, 2 old soldiers slowly rebuilding a friendship that had been stolen from both of them by a young lieutenant's ambition and a senator's greed. 6 months after walking out of the Cascade wilderness that had very nearly killed her, Ren Sutter stood in dress uniform at a podium inside a training facility at Quantico, addressing 200 Marines ranging from fresh recruits to senior instructors, all of them watching her with a particular mixture of skepticism, curiosity, and reluctant respect, reserved for someone whose reputation had outrun their official record entirely. She had been introduced as the newest chief instructor for advanced long-range marksmanship, the first woman to hold that position in the program's entire history. Her combat record had been read aloud, her qualifications established beyond any reasonable challenge. What had not been read, because it remained sealed under a classification that would not expire for another 30 years, was the exact distance of a single shot fired in a Montana blizzard while wounded, exhausted, and outmatched by every reasonable measure available. But word had already spread through the ranks the way it always does among professionals who recognize genuine skill without needing official confirmation. Everyone in that room understood she had done something extraordinary, even without the classified details attached. "Some of you are here because you are the best shots in your unit," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Some of you are here because you want to belong to something elite. Some of you are here because it looked impressive in a recruiting video. All of those are fine reasons to begin this course. None of them are good enough reasons to finish it." Nervous laughter rippled through the younger recruits, then faded into silence as she continued. "This job will ask you to make decisions nobody else in the military has to make. You will have seconds to decide whether the shape in your scope is a legitimate threat or someone who simply wandered into the wrong place at the worst possible moment. You will live with whatever you decide for the rest of your life." She paused, letting the weight of it settle across the room. "I once had a clear shot at someone who had already tried to kill me twice. I chose not to take it. I am not going to tell you that was easy, and I am not going to tell you it was always the right call in every situation you will ever face. But I will tell you this: the rifle does not decide who lives. The scope does not calculate mercy. That decision belongs entirely to the person behind the trigger, and learning to make that decision with discipline instead of instinct is the actual craft we are here to teach you." A hand rose near the back of the room, a young recruit with the restless curiosity that reminded Wren uncomfortably of Tanner during those 4 impossible days in the mountains. "Ma'am," the recruit asked, "what happened to the people who hunted you? Did they ever answer for it?" Wren considered the question carefully before answering, thinking of a general awaiting trial, a senator resigning in disgrace, an old man finally free after 40 years, and a woman with 30 years of violence behind her who had chosen, in the final hour, to become something other than what everyone had trained her to be. Some of them, she said finally, not all of them, and I have made a kind of peace with the fact that some debts never get fully collected in this lifetime. The briefing ended, recruits filing out in scattered conversation, processing everything they had just heard. Ren remained behind alone in the empty room, the echo of 200 departing footsteps fading slowly into silence. Pike appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, older now in the particular way that carrying the truth for 4 decades finally allowed a person to look once the weight of it had partially lifted. "Good speech," he said. "Thank you, sir. You meant every word of it." "Every single one," she said. "Someone taught me that lesson a long time ago, seemed worth passing forward." Pike walked further into the room, glancing toward the rifle resting against the wall, the same custom weapon that had traveled with her through 4 days of wilderness, and a shot that would remain classified for another 3 decades. "I heard Ashcombe's trial finally has a date," he said. "Next month," Wren answered. "Fairweather says the ledger alone should be enough to end any argument his defense attorneys try to make." And Colvin. Resignation was only the beginning. Federal prosecutors are building a parallel case that could take years to fully resolve. Pike nodded slowly, then his expression shifted into something more careful. "Have you heard anything," he asked, "about the other one?" Wren understood exactly who he meant without needing clarification. "Nothing confirmed," she said. "A few unverified reports of a European contractor turning down offers that should have been impossible to refuse. Nothing I can prove. Nothing anyone official seems particularly interested in chasing down either." "Do you think she found what she was looking for?" Pike asked quietly. "Whatever that turned out to be." Wren considered the question for a long moment, remembering a woman standing alone in a snow-covered clearing, 30 years of violence behind her, choosing silence and disappearance over the payment that had been promised for her final contract. "I think," Wren said slowly, "some people spend their entire lives waiting for someone to give them permission to become something else. I do not know if she ever will, but I know she chose not to become what everyone expected of her that day, and sometimes that choice is the only ending anyone actually gets to write for themselves." Pike studied her for a long moment, something like understanding passing quietly between them, 2 people who had both learned the same difficult lesson from opposite sides of the same impossible mountain. "Your grandfather would have been proud," he said finally, echoing words Wren had heard once before in a different lifetime, from a different mentor, about a different rifle passed down through generations of quiet, unbroken discipline. "I hope so, sir," she answered, and picked up her rifle from where it rested against the wall, carrying it out into the pale afternoon light where 200 Marines waited across the training ground to learn everything she had left to teach them. The mountain behind her finally quiet, the truth finally free, and somewhere far beyond the reach of any official record. A woman with 30 years of violence behind her still walking through wilderness of her own choosing. Toward an ending nobody had written for her yet.